Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. Do you ever wonder how film composers face the daunting task of writing a 2-hour film score that's fully orchestrated? Well, film scorers like John Williams write what we call an orchestral sketch. In this episode, I'm going to take a cue from the 1978 movie Superman and show you a John Williams orchestral sketch. He's sketching it out in 8 staves, all the main themes with all the suggested orchestration, and I'm going to show you how he does that. It's coming up next. Okay, so let's begin with this John Williams cue. This is from the movie Superman that came out in 1978, as I said. What you're looking at here is an 8-part orchestral sketch. Now, it's very common for composers to use a sketch pad like this with a simplified score before you fully orchestrate it. This is really common. This goes back to early composers. They would use either a piano score or a double piano score, which we would call a piano reduction, essentially, of the orchestral part. But if you use a little bit bigger, expanded 8-line, like John Williams is doing here, 8-part score, it's a lot easier to keep track of where the woodwinds are. A lot of times they'll be just on one line, and the trumpets, you'll have trumpets on one line, trombones, horns on a line, depending on what the instrumentation is. And then the strings will typically be split between, on a grand staff. So let's take a listen to this cue and see what he's doing. I had to program this mock-up here. I couldn't use the original version because when I did, I uploaded it to YouTube, which was a few weeks ago, and it got immediately taken down. So I had to go through and do the mock-up myself. So every time that you hear it in the video, it's my mock-up of this particular cue. Okay, let's deconstruct this a little bit. If you'll notice, the score starts out with the brass and octaves. So that would probably be the bass trombone and the tuba playing an octave G, and then the low strings playing an octave. So that would be the cellos and the bass. Now the reason it's the cellos and the bass is because it's on a low G on the cello. That G is played, actually notated in the same spot on the bass, but the bass sounds an octave lower. So you're going to get these 2 notes on the bass, and you're going to get the same notes between the bass trombone and the tuba. So the second bar we go into, we get a 2-note voicing, and he brings in the third, so implying a G minor chord, even though we have a 2-note interval, G and B flat. And then we have a modulation, which is once again a 2-note chord, even though we have multiple octaves, and it goes to the notes E and G sharp. Now, that is implying a minor third modulation. Think of it this way. It's implying G minor to E major, which is very classic John Williams minor third modulation, except he wants to keep the texture thin because it's just the intro. And then we have our first full chord, which is a B flat minor chord in first inversion. So it's B flat minor over D flat. That's in bar 4. So he's gradually increasing the texture, adding a note into a 2-note voicing for 2 chords, and then into a full 4-note chord. And then down to the octave Cs. And we have them in multiple parts. We have it broken into 3 parts in the brass and 3 parts in the strings. So most likely, when I'm listening to it, I think that the cellos are divised, so they're playing octave, because the lowest note on the cello is a C, so it's got C. Cellos are playing C in the octaves, and then the basses are playing Cs, playing a C that's written on the second space of the bass clef. And then the brass, it's split into 3 parts, as you can see. Now, all along this, we have the timpani doing a roll. The timpani starts on the second measure on the G and B flat chord, doing a roll on the G with a crescendo, and then a single hit on the E, and it goes down to piano. So the timpani re-enters pianissimo on the C octave, and then the trumpet enters with the opening theme. This is a great John Williams theme that has these open fifth intervals and is using a C add 9 chord. So he starts on D on the 9th, which is great, that sus2, because it gives it a lot of power against that low C. He starts on the Ds, then he goes, so he's going G, C, G, C to D. So it's really a C sus2 sound, and then he resolves it with the third of the C chord to the root of the C chord. It's beautiful, beautiful melody. You'll notice in a lot of John Williams, not just in his melodies, but in his writing for brass, he uses a lot of open fourths, open fifths, these open consonances with octaves. Things like you can have a C5 chord, for example, C, G, C, or what I call a C4 chord, which is really like an F5 chord inverted, but C, F, C, or an open C sus2 chord, or a C quintal voicing, which is open fifths. So you'll have things where you could have so I started with a chordal voicing D, G, C. Then I went to C, F, C, and then I went to C major, or C quintal. So once again. Those kind of voicings are really powerful. They sound great in brass. They sound great in trumpets and French horns. And when you hear things like Star Wars and a lot of John Williams' really big brass fanfares, you're going to hear a lot of these open consonances. Perfect fourths, perfect fifths, octaves, compound fifths, meaning root, fifth, ninth. That's really a sound that John is known for. Let's take a listen to it again. I want you to notice how the trumpet plays its theme and then the trombone imitates it, and then they just trade back and forth. So you can hear the trombone following the trumpet line. The trombone comes in on the note D with 3 trombones. It actually sounds like at 43 seconds that a third trumpet enters because you hear the texture. It says 2 trumpets there, but it actually sounds like a third trumpet is added. So what's going on here in the horns? You see the horns come in with a figure of 5, but what's interesting about it is the voicings. The horns enter. Let's talk about this voicing here, this what I call a G4. So it's G, C, G. It's really an inverted C5 voicing, but you see this very commonly. I just call it a G4 because it's a there's a perfect fourth interval, and then there's a repeated octave at the top. So you can have that, or you have, that would be a G5, G, D, G. That's very common. We use that in rock music all the time. It's a very common nomenclature to call a 5 chord, meaning it would be a root, 5th root, or root, 4th root would be a 4 chord, okay? I don't mean like a 4 Roman numeral, I mean a G4. G4 chord. So the French horns enter with this figure, with this, so it goes, and it goes into open fifths on F, so F, C, G, compound fifths. It's really an F sus2, but the sus2 is like a sus9, okay? That's a quintal voicing. We have quartal voicings that we talked about, which would be F, B flat, E flat. Well, this is a quintal, F, C, G. And it sounds great when played by brass instruments. And then in the next bar, he goes and he plays a G, D, G, right? So that would be a G5. And then he goes down to a G4 voicing. So the first one is, and then that's a really powerful move right there, especially with the trombones and the trumpets trading the theme. In the measure marked 101.5, the woodwinds and high strings enter. The woodwinds are basically echoing in octaves, in 3 octaves, part of the line that the trumpet and trombone are echoing, but the strings are doing something a little bit different. They're adding a lot of the harmonic content to it. Now I programmed the string part. So you'll notice the strings enter in 3 octaves, and then they go into this descending chord progression that's really powerful. It's the climax of the piece here. And the strings are what gives it its weight. So it does F, C over E, D minor 11, and then C, basically G over B, F, D, G, C. But what's cool about it are the chord voicings that John Williams has, the way it's orchestrated. The first chord on F is voiced as an F sus2 with a 6th in it. So it's F, G, D, F, G, D over F. And then we go to a first inversion C major chord, and he follows rules that you would expect him to follow. He has E in the bass, then the first part of the chord, the lower part of the chord that are in the upper strings are C, G, C, a C5 chord, C, G, C, with the triad on top. Now he does have the third on the top and bottom, but that's because the lines are moving in contrary motion now. F, G, D, and then C major with an E on the top, and then you have G quartal, G, C, F, and then you have A, F, A, B, G, B, and then you have your big C major chord at the end. Let's listen to what those voicings sound like together. Moving to, that's a nice pure voicing here, having the C5 down here, and the C major chord in second inversion up there. And then we go to the quartal voicings. You remember our quartal voicings? GQ over GQ. G quartal, GCF, GCF. All over D. So you got this voicing with your F sus2 with a 6. Then you have your C major over E. And then your G quartal voicings, and then this voicing is cool because it goes to a G5 on the top, G, D, G, But in the bottom, you'll notice it has a C quintal or a C compound fifth. So C, G, D. He's adding those notes to give it that melodic interest. That sus2 is really, really important. He's also doing it for voice leading purposes. So you went from this quartal voicing here in both parts over, and then that's back to C. And then we have F5 along with A, F, A. When you have these voicings like F, C, F, and then A, F, A over F, really powerful because you want to reinforce those roots and fifths, especially if you're going to have 2/3 in the chords up top there. You need to have those roots and fifths to give the chord grounding. To ground the second voicing, once again, he has fifth, root, fifth, third, root, third, over D. So it's a 1-6-4 chord. Then it resolves down to a big C major chord. Let me play it for you again. Then with the swell, decrescendo, crescendo, the decrescendo and crescendo for the swell to give the big, powerful chord at the ending. Let's listen to the ending along with the score. Let's listen to it one more time and follow along with the score. This is a great way to work on your piece. You can either do this or a piano score, a piano reduction, but essentially, instead of writing out a full score with 32 parts, you take your main ideas, you figure out what instruments are going to carry the themes, you figure out what instruments are going to carry your counter melodies, and then you just sketch out your orchestration here on 8 staves instead of trying to fill everything in or even just mocking things up and experimenting on your keyboard with your sounds. It's better to sit there with a piano and start working on your ideas and get your thematic material together, write them down with a basic orchestration like John Williams is doing here, and then you hand it off to an orchestrator later or you orchestrate it yourself. That's actually what orchestrators do for these big films that you see, is that the composer will come up with a sketch like this and then they'll hand it to an orchestrator, because a lot of the times these guys don't have time to orchestrate the entire movie. They might have 3 or 4 orchestrators working on it. When you have to write music for a 2-hour film, That's a lot of music. Some of these scores are 800 pages long, believe it or not, the conductor scores are. Anyways, that's all for now. Please subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel. And if you're interested in the Beato book or Skype lessons, you can write me at rickbeato1@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.